Construction makers.
Okay, so we're going to do another discussion episode talking about whether or not Magic ever needed to be or should have been a competitive game.
We recently started sort of discussing whether standard is necessary or not. This is a deeper discussion on should Magic, and this could be extrapolated to TCGs in general and games in general even, is competitive really the right route for games to go? This was something that Richard really liked the idea of early on. The idea of a sport of intellect, basically, is I think how he phrased it.
Yeah, there was that documentary that came out recently that was called Igniting the Spark, which is pretty good. So check it out if
you watch it.
I did watch it.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And one of the things that Richard said in there was that he sees games as the intellectual counterpart to sports, where sport is the physical. I think sport's also arguably an intellectual game as well, but I get what he means, right? It's games being theoretically a 100% mental, or at least pretty close to 100% mental pursuit, mental competition, versus a sport where there's a large physical aspect that can interact with the gameplay, I suppose.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, we're gonna sort of talk about two different sides of this perspective. We're not necessarily going to choose a side to argue or anything, but I figure we should, we'll both just try to talk through whether Magic as a sport or Magic as play. And the sort of the dichotomy that we're discussing is the difference between instrumental play and free play is kind of the spectrum in which Magic exists, right? Instrumental being effectively what a sport is. It's everybody is a rational actor playing to win, playing exclusively by the rules as written. The rules are enforced by a third party. It's very much just governed by a system of rules, where free play is sort of left up to interpretation of the player, right? It's free play. It's Calvin ball. It's make believe at recess. And so, we've previously, we sort of talked about Commander existing closer, not all the way on the free play side of things, but closer to it than competitive Magic.
So early on in Magic's lifespan, Scaff Elias is a popular member of the original design team and good friends with Richard. It noticed a sort of a niche that existed in the player base of people that really wanted to play competitively at the most optimal levels, find whatever the most optimal decks are, and play to that ability. And so went to Richard and suggested trying to create some sort of a competitive format, basically. Richard was all for it, but was really interesting in that Igniting the Spark documentary that came out, is hearing that a lot of people at the time did not like that idea, did not want to gear the game towards competitive play.
Scaff Elias even mentioned that he was inspired by just basically the way basketball works, and that you have the NBA, which is, the highest level of play for the sport, and then you have people that still shoot hoops. So those two things can coexist, but the NBA serves as almost like advertising in a way. It permeates basketball into the culture and means that you end up with basketball courts at schools, and, people shoot hoops in their spare time, but without the sort of institution of professional basketball, that might not be the case.
In the end, obviously, Richard and Scaff got their way, and they were able to start creating whatever the original version of the Pro Tour was. I don't know the full history of how that tournament sort of came to be and evolved, but and it was very successful for a long time. That was how most people, I think, sort of saw Magic the Gathering as a game. It was the premier competitive trading card game for a very long time. So to Steelman, Scaff and Richard's initial vision, it makes sense. You can see the logic in going, yes, okay, this is what's played at the highest level, and there is an entire, you can follow the trajectory of how they got to that point. And they go, well, okay, so if we create this large destination for people to aspire to see the greatest Magic players in the world, there's going to be a lot of people that then will hear of this. That's sort of their way of marketing and advertising the game to a larger, widespread casual audience.
Right, and also other ways of playing the game can exist. Yeah. You can play horse on the basketball court, or you can play a competitive game of basketball against another team. You can play a league in basketball. There's a bunch of different ways to play it still, but you're sort of fully competitive instrumental play is sort of the final iteration of all of the rule sets of the game.
Well,
right?
and I think what's important to note, too, is that even the NBA, it's not like directly advocating for the idea of horse, right? There isn't like the NBA, and sometimes they play horse. Like, instead, it's sort of like, yeah, that's just something people can do because you can go and break the rules and make whatever game you want to make out of the components, if you decide to do that. But it'd be a lot different if NBA was like, oh, there's a lot of people that are playing horse. 20% of the people that watch the NBA play horse. We should start doing horse tournaments.
Yeah, right. Ooh,
yeah.
Be careful with that one. Okay, so yeah, all right. So let's fully steel man, I guess, and fully examine why you would want competitive play. And basically what we're saying is a couple things, right? One is that by embracing competitive play, you're theoretically getting some kind of an advertising a way to get the word out about the game. There's aspirational play, which means you'll have some percentage of players that want to try to get to that pro league, and they're motivated to play the game and be extremely invested in the game to try to get there. Also, other modes of play can still exist, even if there is competitive play. It's not like all play must therefore be competitive because some amount of people playing it are the most competitive.
I think there's notoriety, too. There's something about seeing not only like players at a high level, but seeing like a bit of the glitz and the glam,
An institution, right? There's
right. You're seeing like, well, they've got jerseys and advertisers and it's a big deal. They want a lot of money for doing this,
Okay, so I think the other positive potentially here is that you are putting a lot of pressure on the design team, which can be good and can be bad. I think in this instance, it's good to solidify the systems to be as strong as they possibly can be. They must be absolutely robust and defined, and there's a lot of incentive to do that, because if you're trying to make a legitimate sport, you have to have documentation for not only how the players are supposed to act, but how the referees are supposed to act and how the tournament organizers are supposed to act. There can be a lot of effort put into those things to make them as good as possible, and it's worth it because the payoff is that you have a legitimate outlet for competitive play that has all those cascading benefits like what we're talking about.
I think that actually also extends the overall longevity of the game and interest that players can have playing the game as well, right? If it's like well balanced. And there's instances with sports that I'm sure this has happened, but I can't think of one off the top of my head to call back on, but where basically the meta of a particular game gets so atrocious that it's like almost unbearable to watch as a spectator, right? And so the fact that that having it be so competitive did force them to try and look at like, okay, well, what is working as a spectator sport, like, and is that a fulfilling experience? And like we've seen lots of changes happen due to competitive play. We've seen the limitation of decks, we've seen mulligan rules change multiple times, and all of that stemmed usually from competitive play.
Yeah, so some kind of either they had like a mishap or like something weird happened, or like, yeah, a lot of it was here's the data collection that we have, and it's tournament results, it's live coverage, it's all of these things that...
In some cases, that wasn't even like a large amount of data collection, right? Because you can collect data that's like, well, the game is fine, but then you watch it, and you watch it under the context of there's a lot of money on the line, right? And suddenly you see Luis Scott Vargas mulligan down to 4 cards. And you go, oh, that might be a bad thing for this game.
That's not great.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, it's technically fine, right?
Yeah.
At that point, I think their understanding of mulliganing was like, well, that system is fine. But seeing it in action under that lens changes things.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring up that, yeah, there is, even in competitive play, there is some amount of value being given to how the game is being presented, not just like how the systems create the play experience. It's like, well, yeah, if we wanted the game to be as fair as possible, then that mulligan rule may have been the systemically correct one, but we need to change it because it looks bad on camera. We'll come back to this when we start talking about more
the negatives,
more of the commander side of things, I guess,
yeah.
The free play side of things. Okay, so the other thing that I can think of, offhand for why competitive play would be a good thing also is that data collection that we're talking about, and that you do have it's almost a necessity that you build the infrastructure to collect that data, even if Like it just happens because you're running these tournaments. People have to register the decks. You're gonna know which ones are doing better than others. You're gonna see the tournament results, and you're gonna be collecting that data, whether you really intended to do that or not. It's just a sort of positive consequence of saying we're going to facilitate the game as competitive.
Not to touch too much on the Commander stuff, because we will talk about that, but that is sort of an issue that's happening generally with casual tables being the predominant way people are playing right now.
Where's the data coming from?
Right, where's the data? And so it's difficult, I think, for designers at that point to understand, well, what's the metric of our scope of design, right? Where is pushing the boundaries going to take things too far in our other formats when the majority of our data collection might be built around this other thing, right? Obviously, they have a lot of data on these existing formats of Modern and Standard and in Pioneer, et cetera. But if they're designing for this other casual format and those cards need to exist together, it's a lot harder to find that data for those bounds of design, basically.
Okay, it's interesting because that data is specifically tied to how well the game is functioning too, right? Yeah. It's instead of it being like a secondary to sales or some other kind of data metric that
or
they
even
have.
Fun, right?
Or even fun, yeah. Like how do you measure fun?
Right.
How do you like you can measure sales, but how do you know that's directly correlated to how well the game is performing? It could just be that you're doing a better job marketing the game, or you're making the game more collectible, or whatever. And yeah, sales go up, but that's not necessarily directly related to the playing of the game.
Yeah.
And I think that might even be just one of the best arguments for competitive play generally, is that it's that ecosystem that is necessitated by trying to make a game competitive.
Really, there's a lot of reasons why competitive is good for a game. Being able to sort of design around competitive play is good for designers. But was this the right direction? Because right now we're seeing Magic more popular than it's ever been before, played in more circles than ever before. Majority of play is casual play, and it's what is being supported. And people seem happy.
Right. Yeah. And I think so. The biggest, I think, argument first and foremost against competitive play is that you are serving a minority of the player base. It is a niche part of the totality of the people that play the game. Like we said, it's not that these other modes of playing the game don't exist or can't exist, but you are designing for the NBA. You're not designing for people that play horse, right? And maybe, the sort of hypothesis would be, if we were designing for people who played horse, would we have just more people that wanted to play the game, especially when the ways of advertising have changed.
Right.
And also the ways of data collection have changed. That's a big part of it too. But.
Right. I think when I was watching Igniting the Spark and hearing how it sort of stemmed from basketball and stuff, I think the conclusion, I think it, based off the data they had at that time, I'm sure it was probably the right choice. From as far as what they could gather contextually, that makes sense. But I do think, I wonder, do people really watch the NBA because of how good those players are? Or do they watch it because people are playing this sport that they find entertaining? And I sort of related it to the Harlem Globetrotters. And that's sort of what we're getting currently with Commander, is our version of the Harlem Globetrotters is game nights, right? Is the Harlem Globetrotters don't actually play basketball, right?
It has the aesthetics of basketball, but it's actually theater.
Right. And it's comparable to
in the same way that game nights has the aesthetics of Magic, but it's actually theater.
Right. And it doesn't matter that it's theater, right?
Right.
People just care about seeing their game being played in this way. And they're seeing it under different contexts and stuff, which helps, but the same thing happens with the Harlem Globetrotters. I'm sure if they did the same exact show for the last however long they've been around, it would get boring, so you have to vary it up and stuff. Good news is a card game makes it very easy for you to vary up the show.
New cards
every time.
Come out, things can change. Yeah, there's always something new to explore.
And so I think that I think the idea was there, but I wonder if they were looking at it through too narrow of a lens, specifically of competitive play, as opposed to a broader scope of how do people see your game being experienced. And I think that even early Magic could have potentially been experienced in this way, right? It just happened to be that it was through the lens of competition.
Okay, one thing that we have to point out is how different the media landscape is, right? Because, back when Magic is first being established, 93, whatever, competitive plays not till a little bit later. But
95, I think.
Yeah, 95-ish. Back then, like, what are your options, right? What are the big things that you can look to and say, well, we could copy that model? Sports is one of them, right? What's the big? What if we dream of Magic at its biggest at that point? It's a sport like basketball, right?
I mean,
but
they could have looked at poker, like you said, or chess or something.
Sure, right, yeah. But even then, like, you look at chess, and chess is fairly niche even at that point. You don't have televised chess matches back then. Or maybe you do, but like not really. But like basketball is being played every weekend during the season, right? So you go, okay, well, let's aspire to that because that's the peak right now. And now, since the media landscape has changed so much, and any niche interest has some kind of media ecosystem like Magic, you can change the way that you are advertising your game, the way that you're getting the word out about the game, and it is no longer under that sort of competitive context. It is weird, though, like when we stop and think about, like, okay, well, compare Harlem Globetrotters and, Commander gameplay on YouTube. I think those two, that's a really apt comparison because, again, it's performative. I guess maybe the biggest difference is that, like, the Harlem Globetrotters is not presenting themselves as authentic. They are presenting themselves as performative, but part of the only reason why they can do that is because the NBA exists, right? So, it's... I
was going to say, it's comparable to, like WWE or something, right? Is like, technically, it's performative. They never say it's performative in the moment,
it's
right?
implied.
Yeah. So you as the entertainer you as the consumer want to be immersed into what they're doing, right? So you don't want someone to be like, "Hey, this isn't real basketball." Like, no, you just want to imagine that that's what it is, in that moment.
And I will say that, like, the Globetrotters are much more bombastic in the way that they present their theater of basketball.
Sure, you don't normally play with trampolines, I guess.
Sure, right. Yeah. They're doing flips and I don't know, nobody on game nights is doing a backflip, I don't think.
I think they should start. They should create a challenge every time you get hit, you like fall back into a foam pit or something.
That's a good idea.
It's a good idea.
That's a good idea.
I mean, it's kind of basically just taking like Yu-Gi-Oh! You get hit like life points and you get shocked.
Why is no one doing this?
Probably because no one wants to rent a foam pit for their Commander channel. Would be my guess.
Free idea, everyone.
Oh, no. Okay, wait. All right, this is real. Better idea. Okay, game nights. Listen up. All right, this is the next thing. Okay, play over a foam pit, and everyone is being suspended by wires,
and you get dropped,
and you get dropped
if you
forcefully
lose.
When you lose.
Yeah. Why? See, that's how they step up their production.
That'd be so good.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Then we've entered really performative Commander gameplay, right? And so
no, that's real gameplay. We're getting closer to what real gameplay is.
All right, so we're digressing. Back to the topic at hand. I guess the question then becomes, does a game need to be competitive now to create an audience, right? Because that was the entire intention, was we're going to be competitive because that's the pathway we see to relevancy. And now we have a whole new pathway.
To go off of that is, could you do it in the inverse? Could Magic have started casually, really leaned into that, and then eventually gone into that competitive direction? And I don't know if you could. I think other games have, but I think you really have to strike early because you get so many people that are experiencing a game for the first time. And we could actually look at the early version of the Commander format as a good example of this. Is like, if Wizards had acted sooner in trying to sort of rein in the Commander format and make it their own, they could have probably taken it and adjusted some of those rules in order to sort of make it maybe potentially viable for more of a competitive play.
They could have made it basically Canadian Highlander. It's 1v1. There's no commander. that's a much more viable competitive format.
But I think by waiting too long, by the time that you do try to rein it in, people are like, well, that's not the game that we've been playing, right? It's imagine you want to try and make competitive basketball, but people start playing horse instead and liking horse. And you're like, oh, but basketball. And people are like, no, we're playing horse.
Right, everybody loves horse.
Yeah.
Right?
So no,
get on board with horse. It's good. Like, it's more fun.
We want horse.
Yeah. Forget the NBA. We're all playing horse now, right? Yeah.
But instead, I think, you have to act on it early enough where people are understanding the rules and are okay with changes that are necessary for competitive play.
So this is what's a little strange, though, is that when we look at like competitive play, I think is initially a good way to attract people to playing the game before there's sort of that built-in audience potentially, and then. How do you I without that initial competitive push for Magic, I don't know if you have the established audience to then build into Commander, right? Like I don't know if you can start at Commander.
I think I'm just not as convinced that it's competitive play that is the initial driving factor for the majority of people.
It's just that it's a fun game.
I think some people might see it initially competitively, but whether their goals are not to play it competitively, I don't think that's the case.
My point is that my question, I guess, is if you don't have that sort of competitive initial seeding of the game, of the player base, what can you just go straight to the way that sort of like Commander works now? Like, can you make a game now that is focused on, I mean, I guess you probably can. Like, we could talk about the Bazaar briefly, right? Because that was part of their goals, right? They're like, we're going to make a game for live streamers because we know if we do that, that is an advertising outlet for our game. And so they designed a game specifically to be played while live streaming. Even the way that the game works is we're gonna be focused on the game while we're making our picks. For people that don't know, the Bazaar is an auto battler, kind of like drafting Magic, where you draft things to your team, and then the game sort of executes your team's thing on its own, basically team fight tactics style. And so the Bazaar basically is like choosing that type of gameplay specifically because you move back and forth between thinking and talking about the game and then talking to your audience while the thing is auto playing on its own. So you'll go, okay, gang, okay, chat, tell me what you think about these choices that are presented in front of me. Also, there's no time limit for making these choices in the Bazaar like there is in some of these other games. Right. It's all... you're fighting against like ghosts of players. There's no players to fight against in real time, and that way you can sit there on the screen and wait and talk about the game as long as you want, and then move on from that segment when it gets boring, move towards the gameplay, watch the thing do its thing, see if you won, talk about whether you won or not, and just move back and forth organically between game and audience. Right. The Bazaar is not, it is made with a competitive style of game in mind, right? Like you are battling other players, but it's almost just a PvE, player versus environment kind of game. It's just that you're fighting snapshots of other players' builds. So I think, if we're thinking about whether or not a game must be competitive, now that's a video game. I don't know about tabletop games. But if instead you could create a theatrical outlet for your game, I think that's more the world that we exist in now, right? Where that's the sort of pathway towards getting sort of free advertising, building an institution around your game, building a community of people that want to talk about the game. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think, if we look at the general ecosystem of game marketing nowadays, it's leaning a lot more towards casual, fun, friendly play. And I think we're seeing a lot more games with that design specifically in mind. I mean, looking recently, games like Repo or Peak or whatever that are blowing up on Twitch are there so that various streamers can go with their friends, chat with each other, and get into these various shenanigans.
They're also easier to understand immediately, right?
Yeah.
Like these games
very,
are very
easy to pick up on.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that, if we were to go back to sort of Magic as a spectator sport, I think that was something that I don't know if it's something they necessarily had considered. I'm sure they did down the line, but I don't know if initially they thought that was going to be as big of an issue as it really
It's definitely difficult to watch a game of Magic and understand what's going on.
Yeah, if you have no idea what the game is, like we call this positional heuristics. We technically don't call it that. Richard calls it that. And
Richard Garfield calls it that. That's where we got it from. Their book, right?
and the positional heuristics of Magic, if you are not commonly watching it, are difficult to understand. Other than life totals.
Life totals about it. Right. Maybe lands, number of lands on board, cards in hand. Like those are some positional heuristics that are sort of easy to follow, but like that doesn't tell you the whole story, as many a Magic player knows.
But if you're ahead in points in basketball, like, well, that's the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so one, I guess, argument then towards why you might not want your game to be competitive is that the media landscape now has given ample opportunity to games that are not necessarily competitive. It's just that they are exciting to watch. Part of the rise of D&D has been this story as well. And I wonder if Magic, they're both made by Wizards, so maybe Magic has taken some lessons from D&D in this way and thought, okay, well, look, we have this ecosystem now of theatrical play of Magic the Gathering by certain content creators on YouTube, and we also have things like Critical Role that are the theatrical execution of D&D. And those things are more enjoyable for a larger audience to watch than playing systems as written, potentially.
I do think it's interesting because we saw a huge resurgence of D&D because of people like on Critical Role. And I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, if the data is sort of shared amongst the company. What I think is really interesting about that, though, is that I think it kind of broadens the design space some more. Is that when playing competitively, there are certain tighter constraints that you have to exist in, but being able to play something that can be a little bit more bombastic or chaotic, like some of these more kind of casual, fun games that you're seeing on Steam or Twitch or whatever, it's getting to the point that they're a little overwhelming, but they're still very popular. Peak recently being one that really broke new ground and got a whole lot of
the peak.
Reached new peaks, new heights,
peaks.
Take
a peek.
It peaked.
It's true.
For sure.
It's kind of over. Yeah.
But when not having to worry about trying to be competitive, but instead be entertaining, it shifts what your design goals are, and I think it opens up possibilities for you, which can make it a lot more interesting to design.
All right, so we're going to get real crunchy then. We're going to start talking about different design philosophies that correlate towards this sort of competitive style of play we've seen Magic designed for, and then also this sort of entertainment emergent style of gameplay that Commander is sort of known for. It's not that emergent gameplay isn't part of competitive either, but we'll get into that. So our buddy Michael in the Discord share some documentation on emergent engineering and sort of strategies for designing for systems that create emergence or like systems that have emergent properties to them. And this is in contrast to what would be called like a classical systems design, where classical is more of a reductionist mindset, meaning you are attempting to distill something down to its most simple parts so that you can effectively design it with really low failure rates. So that's kind of something we tend to advocate for from a designer's perspective of like, well, ideally you would be able to decide on a particular experience and then design a system that creates that experience over and over and over again with a lot of accuracy.
Variance in that experience.
Right, variance in that experience, but
it's a specific feeling of that experience, but you need variety.
Right. Yeah. Here's the feeling, the experience that we're trying to create, and we want a system that reliably creates that experience. Where on the flip side of this, you have sort of this emergent engineering perspective, which is that you're creating a system with higher failure rates, but it is leaning, you will get more emergence from that system because you're not as tightly controlling it, so that you get unexpected emergence from it, right? And in that way, you would theoretically have a system that creates more positive outcomes, even though you have a higher failure rate. It's worth that trade-off because whatever that positive outcome that you want is happening more often, even with a higher failure rate. And when we look at games, I think that you could have a perspective of failure rates are more acceptable, especially in a tabletop game where players can fill in those gaps, right? If there's a problem in the sort of system's overlaps or the way that a system is executing, players can step in and say, well, let's have it work this way. This is the rule of cool in D&D. This is rule 0 for Commander. These are these sort of outside of the game stopgap systems that allow you to be more cavalier with your individual card designs and not worry so much about them being broken, and then theoretically allowing the players and or entertainers in a lot of instances here to decide, okay, well, that card just not that entertaining, so we're not even gonna include it in our version of the game. You're kind of empowering players to decide what is most fun because you don't have any possible way to design what is most fun for all players that are playing the game. And I think that's the dichotomy of systems design that we're at with Magic, is that when we're in totally competitive land, we're in classical engineering reductionist mindset of even we're going to limit the card pool down to just the standard environment. We're going to limit it down to 1,200 cards so that we can tightly design and control them for a particular outcome that we're trying to achieve in the standard metagame, versus what we're at now, which is let's open this up as wide as possible and let emergence happen and accept higher numbers of failure rates. I think where Wizards kind of gets into trouble here is that they still have all of the aesthetics of that this thing is that old, the other system, the reductionist system of we're designing for a particular outcome by limiting our failure rates, even though they're not limiting the failure rates anymore.
It's not only that they just resemble that, it's also that they still have to maintain that for the majority of their formats. But if, let's say, there were just a new version of Magic that is fully Commander based, and they just let players decide how they want to play it, they could have some wild cards in there. And I think that they leaned into that a little bit with some of the other sort of casual games like Plane Chase. But I think players generally just kept wanting to go back and play with these other cards, and those cards almost always existed ideally within that standard format.
And it's really interesting too, right? Because you're describing like we could have forked these two design philosophies, and we could have Commander that's in this emergent design philosophy, and standard or whatever that's in the reductionist design philosophy, and both of these things could exist separately. I don't think they coexist though. Like coexisting them together, we keep seeing the failures, right? But you have I don't want to say here I got to be careful here because I don't want to say that they're motivated just by making money, because I could see the financial incentive to say, no, we want this all to be one game, because then no player can ignore any product, because whatever type of Magic they're playing, in any product that comes out is relevant for that type of play. Let's set that aside for now and just in good faith, let's say that's not their primary motivating factor. Let's say that their primary motivating factor is to make them the highest number of players happy with how the game is being played. And if we look at the sort of the emergent design perspective of we're going to accept higher failure rates, but we're going to get more out of that in return, then do we look at more casual standard play and say, everything looks good here, there's no reason to ban anything, even though at the highest levels of the format, we can see that there's failures, but we're accepting them because downstream to the majority of players, they're all still having a good time by our metrics, whatever those metrics might be. And I think that's sort of the weirdness of where we're at now, is that aesthetically, standard is still looked at as being a tightly crafted, legitimate sport by a large amount of players, but Wizards is basically saying, no, we're more interested in the theatrics of play. And I'll even say this too, some of the people that are playing on like the competitive ladder on Arena that are making content on that ladder will change up the deck they're playing because it's more entertaining to their audience. They are self-selecting out of the most powerful decks because the audience wants to see something unique and new.
And I'm sure there's people that are content creators that aren't content creators that do the same thing because they're just bored. They don't want to play Is That Prowess, or they don't want to play VV Cauldron, and so they'll go and play something different because they find that more fun personally. But yeah, you can't base the extremes of a system off of someone choosing to potentially play suboptimally.
So I guess again, coming back to the question of does a game need to be competitive? If Magic was never competitive, they wouldn't be in the problem, I guess, that they are in right now, where you have a percentage of the audience saying, hey, we want this fully instrumental way of playing, but your design philosophy doesn't match up with that anymore. So if they had just never been competitive, they wouldn't have been in this pickle.
And I do kind of wonder if, recently Mark Rosewater talked on his blogatog talking about the process of how they've gotten to where they're currently at, and that this has been a years-long process. And a part of me still wonders, they must still be in it, right? It's a constant evolution that they exist in, trying to have this perpetual game going. And it's possible that a lot of what we're even talking about right now is stuff that they are moving towards, but we're only going to see it in 2 years from now, right? So it's very possible that they are seeing these issues. I believe that all the designers there are very smart. I'm sure there's a lot of people at the company that probably are not satisfied with, stuff like Universes Beyond, stuff like where the current meta decks are. And I'm sure the people internally are not silent about that. And if that's the case, I'm sure that there's some moves. So it's very possible that we'll even see a potential fork, right, of commander gameplay versus this other, or free play versus instrumental play. I don't know what that looks like, but I would assume if it's for the health of the overall game, that's probably where they might be moving towards. And it's possible that right now we're just in this weird sort of growing pains
we're in the
scenario.
Middle, we're in the thick of it, of this transition. It's possible. It's interesting too, right? Because even their most recent the announcement for the ban announcement that came out, Carmen, writes in that article, in expresses quite a bit of, I think, their thinking behind the scenes, which I think to fully sort of instrumental competitive players are going why are you even considering this when the highest levels of your format look like doo-doo? You're basically saying that in the article, she's saying at the lower end, sort of more casual play standard, everything's looking pretty good to them. And from a perspective of competitive is how your game is observed, right, is how your game is advertised, you could look at that and go, well, if people are watching these competitive tournaments, the game looks terrible. But then if you stop and go, well, how many more millions of people are just watching casual standard play, and that looks just fine. And you're accepting those higher failure rates, and that's allowing that gameplay to be more emergent, to have there be more variety, but it's being filtered through entertainers to people that observe the game. I think there's a risk in that, and that risk is that what entertainers are presenting is not reality, right? At the highest levels of the format, right, fully competitive play, that is reality, theoretically, as close to reality as one would get. But then when we look at that filtered through entertainers instead of through professional Magic players, entertainers are presenting an alternative reality. They're not presenting Magic as the systems are. But then if the casual player base is emulating the entertainers, maybe none of that matters.
Well, I think it matters if we talk all the time about not meeting the expectations of the experience, I think is usually what ends up sort of having players fall off, right? And so if your primary mode of advertising is entertainers and the way that they're playing and how they're having this great time and the level of, not efficiency of decks, but consistency, the level of consistency of output of these entertaining moments while watching these content creators, I think it will give players a wrong impression. And
this is the Matt Mercer effect in D&D, by the way. Sure. Matt Mercer is, a voice actor, dungeon master who is very good at what he does, and then players have that expectation when they go to play D&D that a dungeon master will be like Matt Mercer. and it's basically impossible unless you're a trained voice actor, and a professional dungeon master.
And I think the difference there is that at least the idea of what makes a good DM is you're able to see those lines, right? You don't see the behind the scenes of content creators and how they're playing around with their decks differently. They're discussing, hey, is this entertaining? Is there something else that we should do? Should I not play this card?
I haven't drawn a land in a few turns.
Right.
Maybe I should just put one on top of my deck, and we're going to cut it so you don't see that I do that. Like all that kind of stuff is happening.
That stuff happens all the time. And like it makes for more entertaining content, which I think is not a bad thing. It's understandable that these people are doing that. But I don't think other people are going to see that. So instead, in most Commander games, it's just you and your friends passing turns and joking around, but the game might suck. Like, no, you don't know that you shouldn't board wipe 4 times, right? And so this is how we get such a messy culture where people are constantly arguing and debating and discussing what the game is right now.
And what's good and what's not good. And
Right.
those perspectives are all totally warped because everybody's meta is different. And
it's just because
there's no objective truth.
Right. There's no objective truth. There's no alignment on like what actually is the game. And that's sort of what competitive play offered. The difference is someone could watch competitive play and go, that game looks boring as shit.
Right.
I'm not going to play that.
You're right. Or it looks too sweaty or
right.
whatever.
Yeah.
But that is, competitive play is objective truth of what the game is. Okay. So I guess let's wrap up our thoughts here. Does a game need to be competitive to, I guess, gain a certain level of popularity or whatever? Does a game just need to be competitive? Is competitive play something that every game should aspire to?
I definitely don't think it's something every game should aspire to. I think it's a lot harder with I want to say tabletop games in particular, but I think any sort of customizable card game, what we're seeing with trading card games, I think generally lend themselves more towards this competitive play because it has this underlying almost necessity of optimization behind it, right? That's a challenge you're presenting to players is how are you optimizing your customizable components?
Yeah. Well, and like we were saying earlier, the advantages here is that you whether you wanted to or not, you end up creating a system of data collection and of understanding your game systems better and iterating upon those systems to make the systems objectively as good as possible. And it is presented the objective truth of what your game is to you. But if you can instead craft an ecosystem for your game to exist where individual player base can choose what the game is for them, I think that that's ultimately probably more beneficial, I guess, but it also depends on your design goals, right? Like I don't necessarily have a huge want to make a game that is not objectively that people are playing in a way that's not objectively the game. I don't know.
And I think that's where maybe you and I differ a little bit is because I think you have that background with that competitive play. And for me, I think I tend to lean a little bit more towards that casual play, but I think it is still, you still have to be careful around it, right? I think the issue is when you're designing going, well, people just might not play that way, or people might play casually, as opposed to understanding okay, well, what's really, you got to play at the most optimal to see okay, if someone plays really optimally, is that just the same experience over and over again?
Yeah.
Is that boring?
Is there anything there?
Right. And
broken.
I think the biggest issue for me is if you're playing optimally and it's boring. Sure. That is where it becomes a problem,
or broken,
or broken, yeah. Where everyone's just going to do,
boring, I guess,
in a similar way, yeah. If everyone's just going to do the same exact thing, at that most optimal play, you barely have a game at that point.
Yeah, it is interesting that there is this tension between designing for what is optimal play and what is entertaining play, and that those two things are a bit in conflict because the variety, in order to get that sort of variety for entertainers, you're accepting a higher level of failure for competitive play. I don't know if that is always the case for every game system. I do think that if you could design Magic systems from the beginning, maybe you can design so that both of those things are not in the same kind of tension that they are with Magic. I don't know exactly what that looks like. But if you had both of these things in mind, that you're like, well, I want a game that is objectively true in the way that people play it, and I also want that to be entertaining, maybe there's something there, right? But understanding what makes something entertaining and also what makes something function at a competitive level, I think that's tough. That's tough.
It's very tough.
That's
and
a very
I think,
tough challenge.
I mean, we talked about basketball, and I think that sports in general, that's their toughest job.
Yeah.
Is how do you make this entertaining? Because people that play sports are just like any other player. They're going to optimize to the fullest, and sometimes it makes for a not entertaining thing.
They're heavily incentivized to
Right.
to optimize to its fullest.
Right.
So
If you enjoyed listening to us talk about whether Magic should have ever been competitive and whether or not it's dead, please feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
if you think Magic's dead, you can join our Discord. Link is in the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Bye.